Showtime! The Capital G Show starts right now.
What's up YouTube, Capital G here. So guys, today I want to do a discussion on the viability of solemn judgment. And I guess what sparked this discussion was, if you guys remember the preliminary Insector deck that I showed you a couple of weeks ago, you know, I've been playing a deck similar to that, and I had been on the fence on Solemn Judgment. I ultimately decided to run the card, and I've been doing it faithfully, but just a couple of days ago, I dropped the card from my deck because, you know, Solemn, it's just losing more games than it's winning right now. And for anybody out there who's just like, dislike, you're hating on Solemn, you know, who doesn't watch the entire video, I ain't even mad though, because you're just ignorant and uninformed. I think that Solemn is one of the finest cards that has ever been introduced into the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! By Konami. In fact, if you look at all my regional top 8 decks, every single one of them I ran Solemn Judgment in. So don't say I'm not a fan of the card, because I love Solemn. I just don't think that it's a very good card this format. You know, I feel like this format is way too fast and aggressive, and more times than not, you're just being punished for early Solemns by, you know, getting OTK by practically every deck in the format. I feel like unless your deck can make just an incredible lock that's going to work against a multitude of decks, I mean, me personally, I'm just not touching the card with a 10-foot pole. You know, you look at Solemn against the #1 deck of the format, Mermails, and it's like, okay, assuming it doesn't get popped by Marksman, which they've got, what, a dozen ways of triggering and multiple ways of getting back to their hand, you know, you can't Solemn Megalo, you can't Solemn Abystheus, you can't Solemn Gundy when she activates, and it's like, okay, you're pretty much, your options have been dwindled down to, you know, having to Solemn a Diva or a Spike or anything that they normal summon, and it's like, that's fine, but that's only a 1-for-1, so you're not going plus for starters. But if you do that, you're liable to get OTK'd by, I mean, practically any combination of Reborn, Spear, Abystheus, and Megalo, you know, because now they can just go Reborn, whatever, summon Megalo, you know, okay, activate Megalo's effect, attack for 48, you're at 4,000, you lose. You get what I'm saying? And I just don't feel like there's any great opportunities in that matchup. If your opponent's top decking, yeah, Solemn is godlike, you know. Or if you're in a position to where your opponent has basically no options, yeah, Solemn is the nuts, you know. But you're probably already winning anyway. You look at a deck like Karakuri, and I don't think it's that great. You know, first off, they run Royal Decree and Trap Stun, which really hurt the playability in that matchup. You know, let's say you start conservative, a Stratos plus, you know, set 2, and it's like, you know, on their turn they go Royal Decree or Trap Stun. It's like, are you gonna Solemn it? You know, because if you do, you're in a very peculiar situation to where, you know, your one back row has to cover so much ground, you know, and you're at 4,000 life points, so they don't really need a ton of monsters to OTK you. Or do you just let your Solemn do nothing? I mean, that's a deck where they run multiples of Decree and Trap Stun, so it's like, don't think it's not going to happen. And I feel like against that deck, all Solemn is an expensive TT or bottomless. You know, let's say, I mean, you look at that deck and inherently all it wants to do is make level 7 and level 8 Karakuris. Those Karakuris summon other Karakuris and let them draw at the same time, for the most part. That's all the deck does. You know, let's say that instead of having, you know, a Solemn, you have a bottomless for their Karakuri Beret or something like that. It's like, yeah, I understand that they still get a monster, but what you've done is you've eliminated the synchro problem, and they're still a long way from OTKing you. But the thing is, you're at 8,000 life points. If you Solemn that monster, yeah, you go +1. You got rid of their, you know, their E-Teleport plus their Solar Windjammer or whatever. But now you can lose to a single Beret or a single Beredo. All they need to do is get Beret, get Beredo, get Karakuri quick. That's over 4,000. You've already lost. So, I mean, can you understand how the card's really not that great in that matchup? You know, against Dark World or Prophecy, I feel like there is no great opportune time to activate Solemn. It's like, what do you Solemn in this deck? You know, obviously, you're forced to Solemn cards like, you know, Spellbook Judgment Day or Card Destruction, auto-win cards as I call them. You know, Future Fusion for Chaos Dragons would be an example. I mean, those are cards where if they go off, your opponent just wins, so you have to Solemn them. But let's say you're playing against Dark World, and they set everything in their hand but 2 cards, and they go drag down. It's like, do you Solemn that? Or, you know, if you Solemn it, if your opponent has, you know, another outlet like a Dealings or something like that, I mean, you're fucked, because if they happen to discard a Brow or they happen to discard something like a Snow, I mean, they basically restarted their entire deck The difference is you're now at 4,000. You can be, I mean, 4,000 staring down a deck that can summon Grapha like every turn. That's not good, you know. And in hindsight, being 2020, if you don't Solemn, it's like they're in a position to where, I mean, they can just pick apart your back rows with cards like Grapha. You look at a deck like Prophecy, especially when they get Spellbook Judgment Day. If you go second against that deck, you know, Solemn is atrocious because, you know, Solemn being a 1-for-1 is now irrelevant because now it's the most costly 1-for-1 in the game. The thing is, you can't beat that deck going 1-for-1 when they've already resolved a Judgment Day and you're like, they've got like 2 or 3 more cards than you, so you're not going to win the 1-for-1 battle. But if you're going to try and go for a 1-for-1, I'd rather have something like Mystical Space Typhoon that gets me a 1-for-1 but doesn't cost me half my life points. I mean, it's pretty much known that they're going to have a plethora of options at their disposal. I mean, they're going to have cards to negate your traps. They're going to have cards to remove cards on your field in Spellbook of Fate. So it's like, your Solemn can stop one of those cards, but at the cost of 4,000 life points when they're already ahead in advantage? No, I'm not doing that. I will say this. Against slower paced decks that pretty much rely on their normal summon to get rolling, decks like Wind Up and Fire Fist, and to a heavy extent Heroes, yeah, Solemn is fantastic. I mean, if you don't really have any great options and your opponent summons the turn 1 Stratos and you Solemn it, I'm cool with that. I mean, not only have you not recruited another hero, but I mean, there's a good chance that in a deck with a low monster count, you probably don't have another monster, and you have an open field, and your chances of OTKing me are pretty much non-existent. So I feel great in that. You know, outside of these auto win cards like Card Destruction and Judgment Day, I mean, are there any spells right now that are really worth Solemning? Like Heavy Storm is the it card. I will always Solemn a Heavy Storm because I don't want to lose my whole back row. But Dark Hole, really, I feel like Dark Hole, if you play conservative and you don't put everything on the board like an idiot, I mean, Dark Hole is really not that big of a deal. A lot of people 1-for-1 Dark Hole. Let me know what you guys think. Again, I feel like if you can create a lock like these, you know, these macro skill drain decks, if you've got locks to where your opponent can't do shit, yes, run Solemn. But outside of that, outside of like Logia, Doka, and just insane locks like the Verse can do, I don't really feel like it's a card where it should be splashed in the decks anymore. But maybe I'm wrong and maybe you guys completely disagree. I just wanted to talk about it. Thank you guys for watching as always, and take care. Subscribing makes life happy.